We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AV Rant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here
Rob
with
H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. So a little bit of a better week last week, thankfully, as far as lockdown stuff goes. I actually found some toilet paper, first time in 6 weeks. Although, to be fair, I have not been checking like every day or anything. But there actually was some on a Wednesday morning. And where I am working, part of our funding is public funds, and we were looking at having to lay people off in that earlier, like a couple weeks ago, but our province has come through with some emergency funding. And so all the people who got layoff notices, those layoff notices were rescinded. So that's really good news.
Psych.
Yeah, that's really, really fun. It wasn't going to affect me personally, but, of course, it's never fun to see coworkers being laid off. So, we'll take any good news we can these days. That's for darn sure. And that is definitely good news. At my neck of the woods.
I've got a trench in my bathroom that's about 6 feet long right now, and it's looking to go through the bathroom outside into the yard someplace before they find the end of the pipe to replace the entire thing.
But not into your kitchen?
Doesn't look like it's going to go into the kitchen.
So this was your one-day job. It's now a week and a day later.
No. This has been going on this started at the end of last month was the first time we had somebody in here. So it has been 3.5 weeks now.
Yeah.
So, but it's only one day of work, but he should have it done tomorrow as far as the replacement of the pipe. Now, the repairs afterwards, I have no idea how long that's going to take.
But if they don't have to go into your kitchen, that's hugely good news. So take that too.
Yep. Who sent me the Roku?
Daniel. Double.
Daniel?
Yes.
Daniel. That's what I thought. Okay, so I got it.
Nice.
And I plugged it in and set it up. It was fairly easy. Some of the streaming services make it a lot easier for you than others. Like some of them are like, oh, you want to activate on your phone or your computer, or do you want to put in you want to slowly type in your your email and password that you don't remember? Like, one of the first ones, please. But some of them are like, do you remember your password? Because if you don't, you're screwed.
Which is not Roku's fault, to be clear. That's each individual service and how they choose to program their app.
It is so funny how my kids and wife do not understand that just because it's the same service doesn't mean the app looks exactly the same on different devices.
Although,
so that's been a little...
I mean, to be fair to them, why should they expect it to look different? As an average consumer saying, hey, this is, let's say, Amazon Prime or whatever, and it's like, why should it look any different depending on which device you're using it on?
I generally like the Xbox interface just a tiny bit better than I like this. It like for things like Hulu, I can't figure out. Like how it dims the screen and shows you that the next episode's coming. I like to turn that off so that I can just see what's going on, because a lot of times there's still stuff going on at that time. And I haven't figured out how to do that on the Roku yet. I have some interface issues as far as the remote. The Harmony has worked pretty well, but every once in a while it'll just say, oh, I can't find your Roku anymore for a while. And then I don't know why that is right now, but it shouldn't be the case. I thought it was IP controlled too. I think it was over the Wi-Fi was doing it, but it does seem like it needs to be close to the hub.
I think it's Bluetooth. I think the little remote that comes with the Roku, most of them are Bluetooth.
Maybe that's what it is then. I had them two shelves apart, and I was getting no control. And then I put them right next to each other, and now I have full control. So mostly, but my real only complaint on it is that it doesn't have Twitch. Oh, which is odd.
That is odd. I thought Roku had basically everything.
It does not have. It has an unofficial Twitch app, which will allow you to load up an old Twitch app. Which used to work, and now neither of them work. At least none of them. I couldn't get either one to work.
But it has Amazon Prime?
It does.
Because Twitch is owned by Amazon, so...
I am aware of this fact. Yes.
Do you happen to know what exact model of Roku it is?
Premiere Plus.
Premiere Plus. Okay.
Yeah, it's a 4K box.
Yeah,
I can't
nice.
get 4K out of it. But the setup was pretty easy. The other big change, the thing that just cracked me up, because we talk about it all the time in the podcast, is this is like the first box I've ever gotten close to reference level volume on my thing, because it requires me to get. The kids are like, "Why is it so quiet?" I'm like, "Because you haven't turned it loud enough. You're just used to the Xbox being around -20, -25, and this thing wants to be about -5 for most of my apps. Not all of them, but most of them. So I'll keep playing with it. So thank you, Daniel. That's a personal thank you from me. I've and the remote's about I feel like it's going to fall apart in my hand. I'm so glad I have the Harmony. The
Roku
is
remote is definitely minimal. I mean, these devices sell for like $40. That's with the remote included. So
yeah, and the remote has a headphone jack on it too.
Yeah, it does, that's why I'm pretty darn sure it's Bluetooth, because that's the only way that would work, is sending that from the little Roku box to the remote. I'm sure that's Bluetooth. So
yeah, so it's an interesting device. I mean, so far I've liked it. I do like, and now again, I haven't done this in years now, but every time a new audio format comes up, I look over, I'm like, oh, gotta turn on DTS Neo X, because if not, it won't automatically do it.
New source remembers input by input on that Denon of yours. So.
Right. Yeah. All right, so this is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can contact Rob directly at rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. Mine's AVRant, and Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. I just realized that one of my lights is teetering on top of a power cord. What if I just pull the power cord?
Oh, that's going to be a great idea, Tom. Let's try that.
What could possibly just slowly. He's done it.
Made it. All right.
He's done it. Nailed it. Man, today has been just the day for technology. I'm telling you. So yeah, I got that Roku box, hooked it up almost immediately. And it didn't really take that long.
No.
I thought it was going to take a lot longer than it was. So I just sat there with my computer and did it in about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. There's a little walkthrough, gives you, asks, oh, can you want us to sense what kind of display you have? I'm like, yeah, knock yourselves out. I didn't really get into the settings too much. I did turn off the thing that allowed it to sell all my data to everybody at once.
That is kind of how Roku actually makes their money. So, yeah.
Yeah, I found that out pretty quick. I actually don't really care that much. It is a little disconcerting when you're looking things up on Amazon and all of a sudden every ad on Facebook is for the exact company that you were just looking up. I'm like, okay, big brother, just calm it down. You give you a little coming on a little strong. But I need to get into the settings a little bit more. It does. It does look a little bit dimmer than the Xbox with some of the sources.
I was going to ask if you noticed like automatic frame rate switching, or the audio settings about whether it just outputs what the original program had or if it converts it or anything.
It is definitely outputting with you, and I think I may have set that. I don't remember. I think it may have asked me that at the very beginning what it wanted me to do, and but I have noticed stereo coming out. I have noticed 5.1 coming out, and then I had to turn on Neo. Because the stereo was what immediately got me. I was like, oh, yep, that's...
It already kind of has the Xbox speed, although I don't know if it supports Atmos output, like from Netflix. I don't know if it does.
You're gonna
find out,
I guess. This is the Haunting of Hill House or whatever that shows. That's Atmos, isn't it?
Probably.
I'm pretty sure that's Atmos.
I pretty much always just go to Okja because I'm like, that was the first one that was both Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, so for sure, and... Yeah, that's what I always use on Netflix.
Well, I'm not interested in watching that weird pig movie, but I will do that. That's fine. Let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, if you support the podcast in some way, you can do that by going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. So we want to thank Andrew, Kevin, and Mark for doing that this week.
Yeah, Andrew, Kevin, and Mark, thank you very much for your PayPal donations. It's appreciated.
We also want to thank our 111 patrons from over at patreon.com, including Brandon. Patreon is a service where it's a continuing subscription. You sign up and for your content creators of choice, and they'll take a minimum of $1, a maximum of as much as you want, and give that to your your creators that you want to support so they continue to create the content that you enjoy. So 111 people love us enough to do that, including Brandon. So thank you to our 111 patrons.
Yeah, indeed. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up. People heard our plea. They got us back over 110. So that's really nice to see.
I know.
111 patrons there. And Brandon W., thank you for being one of them.
If you can't support us financially, then figure out some other way to support us. Let us know what you did, and we will mention you. So Brian told Outlaw Audio that we recommended their OAW4 wireless speaker kit when he bought one. And we got some notes of gratitude for keeping this podcast going during these uncertain... I hate saying uncertain times. It's pretty certain it's going on, actually. I feel like there's not a lot of uncertainty except for the people who, are getting real angry. But during these times, we want to thank... got notes of gratitude from Daniel, Brandon, Jason, who was also thrilled that we mentioned his new speaker company, Ostinato Speakers. I'm probably not saying it right. Kevin and Ryan. So thank you all of you.
For sure. Brian, thank you for talking us up to Outlaw Audio. And Daniel, Brandon, Jason, Kevin, and Ryan, thank you very much for the notes of gratitude. It is really appreciated. Makes us feel good that we're keeping this thing going. And a huge thank you once again to everybody who continues to listen and write to us and say that they're enjoying the podcast. That's why we do it. That's why we're here. So thank you very much.
All right, in the news, this comes from Carl. Sonos introduced their new $800 Sonos Arc soundbar with Dolby Atmos, plus an updated Sonos sub and then Sonos 5 speaker. Is it a Sonos 5 speaker, or is it?
That's just the name now.
Speakers?
It used to be the Play 5, and now it is just the 5. The Sonos 5.
Next time it'll just be the F.
Could be.
Anyway, so this new soundbar thingy has 11 drivers, 2 of which fire upwards for Atmos, 2 fire sideways for pseudo surrounds channels. I swear it's all it's just a psychological thing. Why would they have to fire sideways to be surround speakers? It makes no sense, but whatever. So on its own, it's a 5.0.2 configuration. You can now optionally add the Sonos sub and the pair of Sonos 1 speakers for genuine rear channels. The Sonos Arc comes in black or white and will be available June 10th. It has one input, a single HDMI eARC port, so all of your sources must plug into your TV, and it doesn't support DTS at all. Why would it? Although Sonos said DTS support could potentially be added at a later date, as well as all sorts of other things.
Yeah, don't hold your breath for it.
But it won't be. It could also toast someday.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe, but
they could have an optional toaster.
This is the first ever Dolby Atmos thing from Sonos, so that's interesting to see. It's $800, by the way, and the new.
It's not that bad for Sonos.
Not
honestly.
that bad for Sonos.
Let's be reasonable as a Sonos price point.
Yeah, this is replacing their former Play Bar, so they still have the Sonos Beam. That is their smaller soundbar-ish type thing. That is still in the lineup. That does not do Atmos. That's just a smaller soundbar. But this is replacing the Play Bar now, the Arc, which, I guess it only has an ARC input, so I guess that kind of makes sense. The only way you can put sound into this thing is through an ARC or an eARC, enhanced audio return channel port. So yeah, you cannot plug any sources into this Sonos ARC soundbar. You have to plug everything into your TV first and then feed it via the ARC port.
That's what we call in the business dumb. I don't understand decisions like that.
Simplicity. They want simplicity.
I do understand it to a certain extent, and it makes a ton of sense if your customer base is installer, driven, because then the installer says, yes, you see, it's only one cable goes down here is perfect. I mean, except for the power cable, which it also needs, but only one cable goes down. But everything goes into your TV just where you want it to be. No. Said no.
I mean, a lot of people who have their TV hanging on the wall with a nice wall plate behind it so that they don't see any wires, they didn't run 4 HDMI cables. So
I've got 5 back there now. I am so shocked. I was like looking at my devices going, how do I have 5? And I'm like, okay, it's the PlayStation 3, the Xbox One, the Ultra Blu-ray player, the Switch, and now the Roku.
That's right. I'm
like, wow, I didn't think I was ever getting over 3 again. I didn't even count the Switch. But that PlayStation hasn't been turned on in so long, I'm not sure. When you turn it on, it might just be like a puff of dust coming out of it. All right, the comments here from some of our listeners. Daniels, this is the fellow who's... Oh, who sent me the Roku. Daniel just wanted to mention that he found Gurinder's question about having curtains in front of absorption panels be helpful in his own setup. Our advice to others has helped Daniel make a lot of decisions in his own theater. That's basically why we keep answering these questions, because just because we answer it for you doesn't mean that somebody else isn't going, oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
That's right. But also, hopefully, I mean, obviously, with the length of our podcasts, I don't expect everyone to listen to every minute of every episode. That's asking a bit much.
Yeah.
But at the same time, hopefully people do listen to more than just, if they wrote in that they're listening to more than just their own individual question, because, there's stuff to be gleaned from everybody's questions.
Yeah. So Chris wanted to share an update. He was having an issue with audio dropping out of his Denon X3400H. At first, he thought it was just with the Netflix apps on his TV, which uses Roku built in, but then he noticed audio dropouts with other sources. He was about ready to look into a repair. We noticed that after giving the command to she who should not be named, her voice played back through his home theater speakers. Turns out that when he set up his Amazon Echo to control his Denon with voice commands, it also paired them together via Bluetooth. And whenever the Echo would make any sound, the Denon would auto switch to the Bluetooth input.
I believe it.
So intuitive.
Believe it.
That was the source of all of his audio dropouts, and unpairing the Denon and the Echo Bluetooth connection has solved it. So there you go.
Yeah. And actually, my parents...
That's the kind of troubleshooting we'll never be able to do.
I know. My parents had a not completely dissimilar situation. In their case, I got them a Marantz Slimline for their TV setup. It's just a stereo setup, but that's all they were using there. And I connected it to the internet so that I could do the firmware update and all that kind of stuff. They're really not using any of the internet sources. And for whatever reason, every once in a while, they were like, how the audio cuts out once in a while. I've got them a Harmony, so they say, well, just press help and it comes back and that's okay. But it's like every once in a while it just drops out. Can't figure out why. And so this was, back when I was able to see them. But the last time I was over there, I'm like, looking at stuff, and sure enough, it would switch to the internet radio source randomly. Couldn't really figure out why, but just completely disconnecting the thing from the internet. Now I've asked them since, and they're like, yeah, never had another audio dropout. So whatever is going on there.
Unplug the Ethernet cable. Yes.
It was Wi-Fi. Yeah.
I can't believe it, but I am almost out of HDMI cables. So many years ago, Clint did an HDMI cable shootout, right? Which he took a whole bunch of HDMI cables and took them to Monster Audio, where they had this crazy
the testing rig.
And then he kept some of the ones he wanted. He's like, I don't know what to do with these. And I'm like, just give them to me. I have had a box of HDMI cables for years. I've been slowly giving them away. I had to actually go digging for one for the Roku. I am out of Ethernet cables. I have to actually buy one. I need one that's 4 inches.
Oh, man.
It's right there. They're right next to each other. But what are you gonna do? All right, Fred. So Fred got some brand new toys. He got a 65-inch LG GX OLED, a Marantz Slimline NR1710, and the Apple TV 4K. He would like clarification about the best connection path. When he just quickly plugged everything in, the Apple TV 4K reported that it could do Dolby Vision and 12-bit video when he plugged it straight into his OLED. He figured that he should be able to use eARC to send the sound out of the TV to the Marantz Slimline, but it doesn't say Atmos when he tried that. Yeah, don't do that. On the other hand, when he plugged the Apple TV 4K into the Marantz, it said Atmos, but then the video, the info for the video said it was only 8-bit. Can we explain to him what is going on in the best connection path? You definitely want to go through your Marantz. I don't see...
I mean, to be fair, it should actually work. It should function. I don't see... using eARC.
Could there be an HDMI cable issue here? No, I don't think so.
I think the more likely thing is that, so I agree with Tom, the easiest way is plug all your sources into the Marantz and then have one cable going from the output of the Marantz to your OLED. That is how we would typically recommend the connection path. Right. But I think the reason he was getting the video info saying it was only 8-bit is because by default, in the Marantz receiver, it does not turn on the enhanced for 4K HDMI bandwidth option. You do have to manually activate that. I don't really know why that is still the way things are defaulted, but it is under the HDMI section of the Marantz's settings, and you do have to activate the enhanced version, which allows the full 18 gigabits per second bandwidth and all the lovely HDR and 10 or 12-bit goodness to get through those HDMI ports. And since the default is that the enhanced is turned off. I'm pretty sure that's all it was. Also, like, eARC does need to be manually activated, so that's probably why, just by default, straight out of the box is plugging everything in right away. Probably why that didn't work. Like I say, to be fair, plugging the Apple TV 4K into the OLED and then trying to use eARC back to the Marantz should function. That should function, but eARC would have to be activated both in the TV and in the Marantz. So it's a settings thing, but it should definitely work.
Yeah, no, I mean, unless everything's, for some reason, it's faster or shorter to go to the TV than is the receiver, which is almost never the case. It always makes more sense to me to just plug everything into the receiver. Yeah. The receiver's basically, its job is to do what you're talking about. So setting it all up to the TV, have the TV set it back down. I don't trust those TVs, man, to do it right.
I mean, to me, ARC makes sense if you're actually using the apps that are built into your TV, because
that's what it's for.
Yeah, that's really what it was for. Because how else are you going to get that built-in app audio back to your AV receiver? It used to be an optical cable, but now we can do it with HDMI ARC. But yeah, with an Apple TV 4K, you're not going to be using the built-in streaming services in all likelihood. Although maybe YouTube, since the one inside the LG OLEDs can actually do 4K HDR from YouTube, and the Apple TV 4K cannot. So there might still be a reason to end up using ARC, which is to use the YouTube app built into your OLED. But hey, that GX is a gorgeous TV, so congrats on that.
All right, I was just doing a quick search. It looks like Vudu supports Atmos on the Roku, but not Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Yet. That's just from what I gleaned from the very top of my Google search, and I'm sure I will search a little bit more later. So Fred's bedroom theater is in a bedroom, and with restricted placement options, it's set up to be 15 feet wide and 11 feet from front to back, with his seats right up against the back wall. There's no option to move anything. A number of years ago, he built his own speakers and subwoofer using GR Research designs. The cabinets are super overbuilt, and if he had to do it over again, he wouldn't go quite so overboard, but he's always wanted to build his own speaker, so it was worth it. It's a red thing around the tweeter. What is that?
I mean, that's just the tweeter faceplate, the red.
Is it really?
I mean, that looks like ribbon tweeters. Maybe folded ribbon.
Yeah.
I can't quite tell if those are
I can't
regular true ribbon or if that's folded ribbon, but no, that's just the faceplate. That's all that is.
I couldn't build the box that he has built if you gave me 100 ears and infinite lumber to do it with.
That's a lot of ribs inside of that subwoofer cabinet, all right? That's some stuff.
Not a chance that I would be able to come out with anything that looked like that. I don't think I could make a cube. I don't think I could do it.
You might aim to, but it wouldn't really end up that way.
I would have the best of intentions. It would. Yeah, there would be no internal bracing whatsoever. So his surrounds are an unusual design where they're intended to fire straight up at the ceiling. This was well before Atmos upward-firing speakers were ever announced. Their response and crossover were specifically made for this up-firing design in mind, so they don't sound right if you just try to use them as regular speakers. Now that he has his Marantz NR1710, he has the option to expand to Atmos. He tried plugging his up-firing surround speakers into the Atmos speaker binding post and calling them top middles. That turns us a setup into a 3.1.2 configuration, but all of the normal surround channel sounds came out of his front speakers. Now it just didn't sound right. So if you were to add another pair of speakers, where should he put them? Front heights, on his front wall, top fronts and ceiling. He's thinking top middles directly overhead don't make much sense if he's still using his up-firing surround speakers. But could he maybe call his surround speakers top middle since they fire up anyways, and then add a new pair of regular surrounds to either side? What do we think is best? What I think is best is that you don't use up-firing surround speakers, but you're not going to want to do that. So, I mean, the easiest solution for this is just to get rid of those odd designed ones. And even though you built them, I'm sure they're lovely and whatever, and get something normal. But so,
I mean, I'm in favor of somehow getting normal speakers to your sides. Somehow, I'm in favor of that. It's just I don't know how well the upward firing speakers that he built himself are going to work as Atmos modules, because they weren't designed to be Atmos modules. They weren't designed to actually make it sound as though the sound is coming from above you. They're just like sitting on the ground beside you and firing up, with the idea being that they'll somehow sound more diffuse, but still basically beside you like a movie theater, somewhat elevated and over to your side, and diffuse is what they were going for with the upward firing design. They weren't necessarily trying to make it sound like it was coming from above you. So whether calling them top middles and calling them Dolby enabled, so that it will, your AV receiver will apply its filter to them, its curve to them, I don't know how well that'll actually create the illusion that the sound is coming from above you.
Okay, so they're supposed to be to your sides, firing up, so they give you this diffuse sound. Yeah. So you're supposed to be sitting like almost 90 degrees off axis from these things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of basically is the point. So my one suggestion is get normal speakers to your sides, take these things, put them up like almost right against your ceiling, but point them towards each other, point the drivers towards each other, so that they're lying on their sides, pointing towards each other, so that you're now sitting way off axis to them, like you were supposed to be when they were to your sides, but now they're way up high. Like, I want these things to be almost on the ceiling. Like, if you could mount them to the ceiling, firing directly at each other across the room, across the couch, that's how I would
and
use
then
them.
Call them top middles, and not Dolby enabled top middles, because they are physically above you. Just call them regular top middles.
That's about the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in line with what I want you to do, which is to somehow get normal speakers to your sides as your surrounds. Yeah. I do want you to do that. And then, since you already have these, it would be nice to be able to use them. They look pretty sizable, so I don't know what it would take to actually get them mounted way up high and close to the ceiling. But if it can be done, I mean, that can be a shelf that holds them up there. I mean, normally if you only have 2 speakers overhead in an Atmos configuration, which is all you can do with an NR1710 because it's 7 speakers maximum, you would go for top middles. That is the normal thing to do. So, I'm in agreement with that. The other thing you could do, since you already have them, is try firing them up, label them as Atmos enabled speakers, so that the AV receiver will apply the weird curve to them, and just see if they do create the illusion that sound is overhead at all. Because if you only,
I would still put them as far above you, as far as above your surround speakers as you possibly
could. I was just thinking if physically that's difficult just because of their sheer size. So if calling them enabled actually creates the illusion that it's overhead, then use them for that.
Raf has an enclosed dedicated theater room, roughly 13 by 18. His primary seat is at the 2/3 mark, so he's about 6 feet of space behind him, following the typical dual subwoofer placement advice for his pair of SVS SB-3000 subs. He put one in the middle of his front wall, one in the middle of his back wall, but if he's being honest, it didn't sound as good as having a single sub on the back wall directly behind him. So at the moment, he actually has the two subs stacked, both of them 6 feet behind him. What are our thoughts? If you think they sound better than the other way, then I mean, what am I going to say? You're wrong. I mean,
and
I'm not in your room.
It is anticipated that in a rectangular room, if you were to only have one subwoofer, that in the middle of the front wall or the middle of the back wall is where that single subwoofer would perform best. So you're not out of line with the already existing recommendation. It's just that using the recommended placement for 2 subwoofers, for whatever reason you didn't like. Now, it brings up the question of what does it mean to say something doesn't sound as good? Because is it that it doesn't sound like what you were used to or what you were expecting? Or is it that if you play a bass sweep, it actually doesn't sound as even and linear as using just a single subwoofer position? To me, good means I play a bass sweep, and now that bass sweep sounds linear and uniform across all of my seats. And that doesn't necessarily line up with what I want or expect from a bass in a given song or movie. I might be expecting a harder hit in the chest, and it just isn't there, but it's actually accurate to what's in the signal. Disappointing because I wanted it, but is actually accurate to the signal. So that's really the question. When he says it doesn't sound as good, I don't know what that exactly means in this instance. I would encourage you to play bass sweeps, because I mean, this is one of the things that comes up frequently. Once you actually know that what you're hearing is accurate to the signal. It's revealing of a whole bunch of content. Now, you're not under no obligation to actually like it, but at least it reveals what is truly accurate to the signal.
Yeah, and that's probably my sense of what I mean. It sounds like he might be the only one in the room that really cares about the sound, or maybe he's the only one in the room, period. In which case, having that one sub there, maybe it gives him a boost in a couple of frequencies that he really likes, or an area that he really likes. Not necessarily the most accurate of reproductions, but it's good in that one seat, and that's where he always sits, and he's fine with that, and that's fine.
It is fine.
There's if you ask Rob and I what we want there to be the most accurate sound that you can possibly have in your theater, so that whatever the disc or whatever the media that you're streaming or whatever it is, whatever it tells your speakers to do, that's what you hear. Okay. That's what we want your system to be able to do. Now, once you get your system together, you go, I don't really like that. Then at that point, we don't care. You have done what we were looking for, which is you tried it in the way that we know is the best way to get the most accurate sound across all of your seats. Okay, but if you don't care about those other seats, that's then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter at that point. You've tried it, you didn't like it as much as this other way, then knock yourself out, you're fine.
But there are a couple of other possibilities, which is that we don't know every detail of how he set up the dual subs when he had one at the front and one at the back. Were they actually level matched, or is it possible that they weren't properly level matched? It's easy to not actually have it exactly.
Were they in stereo if he's using a receiver that does stereo
exactly subs? I mean, particularly Yamahas that actually have a setting for front and back, but when you do that, a lot of times one of the subs isn't playing at all because it only crosses them over with certain speakers, and they do strange things with that. So were both subs being fed a mono signal? Were they properly level matched? Is it? I mean, he described a rectangle, but is your room truly a rectangle? If it isn't, maybe try my wonderfully tedious 12-step guide, and go through. There are a multitude of settings things in addition to just positioning the subs that might get the two subs across the room sounding the way that you actually want them. So yeah, plenty of things to still check there.
Okay, Nick, back in 2017, Mark Henninger reviewed the SVS prime elevation speakers for SVS Forum. He described mounting them up high on the side walls, 4 feet in front and 3 feet behind the seating position. Nick was not surprised to read Mark's opinion that they sounded better than upward firing Atmos modules, but he was surprised at Mark's comments that the prime elevation speakers also sounded better than in-ceiling Atmos speakers firing straight down. Mark commented that the prime elevation speakers being angled seemed to be the reason for his preference. Said his brain.
And these were on the side walls, so they weren't actually aiming at him. Yeah. They were on the side walls, firing down and in front of him and down and behind him.
Right. So what's our opinion on how Mark would have found the prime elevation speakers to sound better than in-ceiling Atmos speakers? Let me tell you a dirty little secret about reviewers. They run out of things to say, all the time. They straight out just go I gotta talk about something. They sound better than and then they'll just say something. I mean, it happens all the time.
And then it lives forever since everything on the internet does these days.
But the other thing is there's a psychological component to having a speaker facing you that we don't know how many times people have told us that when I move my subwoofer so that the driver's facing me, I get more bass when I move it away. I'm like, no, you don't. It's not physically possible, but your brain tells you that it is. I mean, we know that it's not possible. And in this case, too, there's a psychological aspect to having a speaker firing at you that makes you think one thing or another. And I would go out as far as to say most likely scenario is, I am paying super close attention to these speakers, and maybe I haven't been paying as close attention to my in-ceiling speakers, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the cold hard fact could be his in-ceiling speakers are garbage compared to the
which is really common. A lot of in-ceiling speakers are not very good.
So it could be all of this or none of it.
Well, also, this was fairly early on, and to be honest, I'm not sure if Mark actually had his own in-ceiling speakers at the time. As I recall, he was basically comparing it to the Atmos demos he had mostly heard, which is a completely different room and a completely different setup. And, I mean, if it's a convention center, then some of them had, like, in-ceiling speakers, but there was no actual ceiling. They just, like, had them installed in, like, a lattice, framework above, and there was all kinds of weird stuff at a lot of these demos. Where it's highly questionable what you're actually hearing. Plus, he didn't really describe, again, what he actually meant by sounds better. More noticeable? I mean, that's right. One way that somebody might describe it sounding better, but that's not necessarily what Atmos is even going for. So there are multiple reasons why this could have been the case, but not the least of which is just, I like these speakers and I want to praise them, which we like those speakers too. So when you're looking for ways to praise them, an easy way is to say, these sound better than the upward firing or the in-ceilings that I've heard.
Right.
I think that's actually the most likely.
No brands named.
That's right.
So after we mentioned it in the news 2 weeks ago, Vincent Teo from HGTV Test did indeed post his review of the Changhong CHIQ A5U. What am I doing? I have somebody's password. Ultra short throw laser projector, which is the first consumer projector with Dolby Vision. Everyone, including Vincent, has mentioned how we didn't really expect to ever see Dolby Vision support on projectors, but isn't it actually a pretty big deal? For example, pretty much all of Netflix's and Disney Plus's HDR content is in Dolby Vision. So if you want to see that content in HDR using a projector, don't you need a Dolby Vision projector? Well, you need the Dolby Vision projector. Well, you need a Dolby Vision to see Dolby Vision, but you don't need Dolby Vision to see HDR.
That's right.
So HDR is just metadata on top of metadata. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not an improvement. I don't know. I haven't seen the side-by-side comparisons, and I can't tell you. But, I mean, it's not like if you don't get Dolby Vision, you don't get high dynamic range. Yeah, because that's not
when playing, say, Netflix or Disney Plus through a display that can do HDR10 but not Dolby Vision, you will get the HDR10 version. Right? It'll recognize that your display doesn't support Dolby Vision, but it will feed you the HDR10 version instead. So you still get HDR, just not the Dolby Vision flavor of HDR. So, I mean, an example of this outside of projectors is all Samsung televisions, which obviously there are a tremendous number of Samsung TVs out there, and they support HDR. They support HDR10 and HDR10 Plus, their own flavor of dynamic metadata, but they do not support Dolby Vision. There are no Samsung displays that do. So, clearly you're not going to be watching Disney Plus or Netflix on a Samsung TV. Oodles of people are, and complaining that you're not getting any high dynamic range. You are. You're just getting the HDR10 version of it. If you're watching Amazon Prime, you can get the HDR10 Plus version, since that's pretty much the only streaming service that actually supports HDR10 Plus. So yeah, it's not necessary to see high dynamic range to have Dolby Vision.
Daniel is trying to hook up a stereo sound system in his shed. He has a car stereo system that he can power directly with the DC current being generated by his solar panel. So now he's just trying to figure out the best way to send audio from his iPhone to that car stereo. Bluetooth.
He said best.
That's the way I would do it. The car stereo does have a USB input, so he could plug his iPhone in directly, but he would really prefer to be able to keep his phone in his pocket. This car stereo also has a stereo 3.5 millimeter jack, and Daniel already has an Apple AirPort Express on hand. That it has a 3.5 millimeter audio output and also an optical audio out a connection, but the car stereo doesn't have optical in. So would he be losing audio quality by using the AirPort Express's 3.5 millimeter audio output? He's thinking he wants to keep the audio in lossless quality. Would the USB connection do that? Will there be an audible difference using the 3.5 millimeter audio jacks? So if it's going in over 3.5 millimeter, it's coming in analog.
It's analog. So at that point, it's the Apple AirPort Express that is converting the digital audio to analog audio and then outputting it as an analog audio signal.
So that would be the limiting factor. Whatever formats it can handle, that would be the thing that you would be worried about. So if you have it in AAC or whatever Apple's lossless is these days, or FLAC or something like that, then as long as the AirPort Express can do that, then and you can send it that way over, I guess, AirPlay,
Yeah, you could do it just Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could do AirPlay for sure as well. And so AirPlay is lossless in the sense that whatever is playing on your phone, whatever that might be, because what is on your phone isn't necessarily a lossless audio track, but whatever is on your phone will make it to the Apple Airport Express without any additional loss, right? If you're already playing an MP3, that's a lossy format. That might be what's stored on your phone, but there will be no additional loss going from your phone to the Apple Airport Express. You can use AirPlay. Then the Apple Airport Express will convert that into analog audio and feed that into your car stereo. Now, is that going to be dramatically different than connecting USB directly from your phone to the car stereo? The USB connection would be entirely lossless. It's not going to apply any lossy compression to the signal with USB. So it's coming out of your phone via USB straight into the car stereo. Well, now the car stereo is converting whatever came out of your phone from digital to analog and then amplifying it and playing it. Is the DAC in the car stereo going to be any better than the DAC in the Apple Airport Express? And honestly, I highly, highly doubt that it is. I mean, in all likelihood, the two DACs are completely equal in sound quality. So really the only question is, could there be any noise associated with the analog output of the Apple Airport Express? And there, I don't know. I don't know if it has any noise on its line level output or not. But I mean, at the end of this, you're talking about a car stereo amplifier with speakers in a shed. So how much am I really, really worried about every last possible drop of lossless audio quality? And my answer is not much at all.
Right.
I really genuinely think that using the Airport Express is your easiest solution here. That way you can keep your phone connected wirelessly. You're using AirPlay. There's no loss between your phone and the Airport Express.
All right. Tom, not me, different Tom. What are the pros and cons of a two-way speaker design versus a three-way speaker design? More complex crossover?
Yep.
Would be one of the pro cons. I mean, some people might think that that's a pro. Some people might think it's a con because you have
more opportunity for there to be issues with a crossover in a three-way speaker, because ideally in a three-way, so let's just explain, in a two-way speaker you've got a tweeter and a woofer, and that is playing all the frequencies that speaker plays. In a three-way design you have a tweeter and a mid-range driver and one or two or perhaps more woofers below that, so you've got three different sound producing things divvying up the frequency range. Now in a ideal three-way speaker design, you would have a high pass filter for the tweeter, so that only very high frequencies go to the tweeter. You would have a low pass and a high pass filter for that mid-range driver, because you only want it handling frequencies in the middle. And then you would have a low pass filter for the woofer that is handling the bass. Now, we have seen some three-way speaker designs that get real cheap on that mid-range filter, the filters that go on either side of the mid-range driver, where they basically just rely on the mechanical limitations of that mid-range driver to roll off the bass, or sometimes even worse, to roll off its treble output, and you don't really have proper filters. So the opportunity is there for it to be done poorly, whereas in a two-way speaker design, you only have a high-pass filter for the tweeter and a low-pass filter for the woofer that is handling both mid-range and bass. So it's simpler and therefore less expensive to do it properly in a two-way speaker design.
But in a three-way design, you have the ability to more finely tune what exactly each driver is doing, so that each driver is more optimized for its exact frequency range. You know, your tweeter and your mid-range can cross over a little bit higher, and therefore your woofer can cross over into your mid-range and then maybe play even lower than the two-way design would allow you to do. Is that always the case? Not necessarily. I mean, the pros and cons of a two-way speaker design versus a three-way speaker design in my mind are, I don't even think of it. Like I look at a speaker and I literally do not care how many drivers are staring back at me. That has very little bearing on it, because a great speaker designer is going to design a speaker that, number one, they're comfortable designing, they're familiar with, and they've done a lot of testing with, and they've had a lot of success with, and it doesn't make a lick of difference if that person always does 3 ways or always does 2 ways or whatever.
I mean, it's pretty difficult in a generalized sense to make, say, a 2-way speaker and a 3-way speaker that have similar capabilities across the board and have the 3-way speaker be the same price as the 2-way. I mean, you're just talking about more components,
more drivers,
a slightly more complex cabinet that you have to design because it has to have at least 3 cutouts in it instead of only 2. So, I mean, these types of things, generally the 3-way speaker is going to be more expensive, and therefore, typically you're only going to go to a 3-way design when you can get benefit from doing so, such as higher output capability. Because clearly with only 2 drivers, a tweeter and a woofer, you're going to have some limitation on how loud that can play. Like, a good example is over at Ascend Acoustics when Dave was doing the Sierra series of speakers and he was using the ribbon tweeters. Well, the ribbon tweeter in the Sierra 2-way speaker can only play so low, and it starts to break up below that point. So in order to get a good crossover in a 2-way speaker design, he had to use a really expensive woofer so that it could go high enough to cross over the tweeter and still play low enough to be a satisfying speaker. And a lot of people ask, well, why don't you just go to a 3-way speaker design? He said, well, if I did that, the cabinet would get a lot larger. I would end up with a mid-range driver that's great, but then in order to have not tamp down on the output capability, I'd have to use 2 woofers at the bottom to match the output of the tweeter and the mid-range driver I would use. He's like, I've already got a tower speaker that is that design. So, there's a lot of times people will say, I want a 3-way bookshelf just because I like the way they look or they're bigger and that makes me think that they're better. A lot of those actually play, surprisingly, quieter than their 2-way counterpart because they only put 1 bass driver in it, and that's now the limiting factor. So, it's ideas of design. The 3-way can be more complex and therefore more expensive typically, but it could play louder if done properly.
CJ would like some clarification about the CEA 2010 subwoofer measurements that are often published by manufacturers and in subwoofer reviews. He basically wants to know what bearing those measurements have on real-world listening. For example, if he looks up pretty much any of the subwoofers that we recommend, all of them seem to list greater than 100 dB output from 40 hertz on up, but when he's used his SPL meter to see how loud his music is playing, it never goes above 95. He can't tolerate it being louder than that. So do these burst and peak output numbers really even matter? Well, the number one thing that whenever you set up a standard like the CEA 2010 subwoofer measurement standard is that you can now compare subwoofers based on the measurement because it's all done in the exact same way. If they've been done properly, it's like 1 meter or 2 meters. Or whatever
you're allowed to do either
ground plane,
1 meter or 2 meter, but you're supposed to specify so that you can do the comparison.
Specify, ground plane measurement with nothing around it, for a million feet, out in the field someplace where it's quiet. So what does this allow us to do? Well, it allows us to see what the response of the drive, what the subwoofer response is without the room. Right. And that's where we get into it. So you're like, I don't need a subwoofer that can play up to, greater than 100 dB from 40 hertz on up. You're right, because you don't want that. We were watching Jurassic Park the other day, and it's just unbearable. When you get up, I thought to myself, I'm going to watch it at reference volume. I'm going to be like I'm in a movie theater. I'm not watching it at reference volume. I got to like -5 or -7.5, and I was like, just shut up, Velociraptor. You're way too loud.
To be clear, a lot of full-size commercial movie theaters don't play at full reference volume these days. IMAX is like the one place you can go and get true full reference volume. And a lot of people, you'll notice in an IMAX theater, are wincing sometimes because full reference volume is real loud.
I remember when THX first really came out, and this was way back when The Crow was in the theater. Oh, I think it was Forrest Gump I went to go see in the theaters, and they had the train demo at the very beginning. They had that at reference volume. It was unbearable. I mean, I was like, I can't wait for this part to end. This is awful. It was very, very loud. So, but you got to remember, we're not looking for playing 100 dB sustained for any length of time. What we're looking for is the ability to play up to reference volume, which is like what 105, 115 or something like that.
Yeah, it's as high as 115 in the dedicated low frequency effects channel. Ideally, you should be able to get to just over 110 decibels. That is what is required to genuinely be hitting full reference volume. But that is in your room, where you will have room gain, unless you have an absolutely massive space, and some of our listeners do. But in an enclosed room, you will have room gain. So the subwoofer itself, out in a wide open field, doesn't necessarily have to be able to play 110 dB plus from more than 2 meters away, type of thing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of real world, it is so that we can make that comparison between different subwoofers, because otherwise the people can fudge the numbers like they did all the time earlier on. We were very glad to have this sort of standardized measurement procedure so that at least we can compare a little bit more closely and have a better idea without having to do the measurements ourselves every time.
Right. So another thing that confused him was seeing the CEA 2010 measurements posted by Audioholics for the RSL SpeedWoofer 10S, which was $400, and the SVS SB-3000.
SB-3000. No.
SB-3000, sorry. At 40 hertz on up, the SB-3000 has a maximum SPL figures that are 8 to 10 dB higher than the RSL SpeedWoofer 10S, but from 32 hertz on down, they're very close, with the SB-3000 only measuring about 1 or 2 dB higher. Is a 10-inch RSL actually similarly capable to the 13-inch SVS in that lowest octave, or is he missing something?
Now, this is an interesting thing to note, because we are talking about a 10-inch ported subwoofer versus a 12-inch sealed subwoofer.
Right. So we know that sealed subwoofers, they tend to, the hardest part. Ported subwoofers, the whole reason we port them is because the port adds, more bass to the sound, and that allows the subwoofer to play louder. And a lot of times it's easier to get them lower as well. And whereas the sealed subs, they tend to drop off pretty heavily there towards the bottom end. What do you say, Rob? What's the
Yeah, I mean what's interesting is that so in the response of the SVS SB-3000, we're seeing exactly what we would expect from a typical sealed subwoofer, which is that at 40 hertz versus 20 hertz, 40 hertz is about 12 decibels louder than that same subwoofer for playing down at 20 hertz. That's exactly what we'd expect with a sealed design, which tends to roll off at a rate of about 12 decibels per octave. And that's exactly what we see. 40 hertz being 1 octave higher than 20 hertz, it's about 12 decibels louder, and 40 hertz is right about where it starts to roll off. So down at 20 hertz, 25, 32 hertz, which is where the CEA 2010 measurements are done, we're seeing these lower output figures, which is exactly as we would expect. Now, that RSL SpeedWoofer 10S with its port is benefiting from that port producing more sound pressure level via resonating with the sound. And down there, the SB-3000 is still a tiny bit louder, even at 20 hertz, than a ported sub. So it gives you some idea of how powerful that SB-3000 driver really is, because it is the driver alone making all that sound. It has no help from a port resonating along with it. But we see the huge difference once you get above 40 hertz, where now the SB-3000 is like 10 decibels louder. So driver on driver, because up at 40 hertz and above, the port is not contributing to the SpeedWoofer 10S. It's not helping it out at that high of a frequency and above. So we're seeing that, yes, the SB-3000 is like 10 times as powerful in terms of what the driver alone can do. But that's showing you what a port does in a speaker. Yeah. It's saying that it's managing to maintain basically 10 to 12 decibels of additional output down at the lowest octave. That's what that port is contributing. So if you were to compare the SpeedWoofer 10S to the PB-3000, you would see that the PB-3000 remains 8 to 10 decibels louder at all frequencies because it doesn't have the low-end roll-off that the sealed version does. Now, we've been talking about, could you use a ported sub and a sealed sub together? Well, here's an interesting case where if you're talking about what is the lowest common denominator that we're looking for in terms of output and extension, and you're saying the 20 hertz output of the SpeedWoofer 10S is suitable, and I want to match it with a sealed subwoofer for some reason, well, the SB-3000 is a good match because down at 20 hertz, they're similar, and you have piles of headroom up at 32 hertz and above in the sealed box. This is an instance where the sealed box is not the limiting factor at all. It has the additional headroom, but it gives you an idea of what you have to do with a sealed box. It costs more than twice as much, has a way more powerful driver and amp. That's what you have to do in the sealed box to get you there.
To get that. So CJ listens to a lot of classical music, including pipe organ. So he's concerned about 16 hertz output at the lowest pipe organ note. I don't believe that people actually listen. I'm sorry, CJ. I don't believe that people sit around their house and it's dun 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 dun. It's like Phantom of the Opera up in there all the time. I just have a hard time picturing that in my mind.
Just because we don't do it doesn't mean CJ doesn't. Just because I don't
do it. That's right. The first thing I did when we got quarantined was I set up a Pandora station called Quarantine Radio for me and my kids, and everybody got a seed. My one son chose jazz. My wife chose a Queen song. One of my sons chose a pop song. My youngest son chose like some, I don't know. Who's the guy with the tattoos all over his face? Malone, Post Malone, is that his name?
I'm totally out of touch and I don't even care anymore.
But not once has pipe organ music showed up on this playlist. So anyways, so he's concerned about 16 hertz output at that lowest pipe organ note. He's in a 3,700 cubic foot space. How can he know if a given sub is capable of the 16 hertz output he needs? Needs is strong, but okay. Does he go by the manufacturer's quoted specs? Are those reliable? It depends on the manufacturer.
Yeah. Some of them are.
I would trust SVS. I would trust HSU. I would trust Power Sound Audio. I would trust Rhythmic. And that's about it.
I would trust Monoprice as well.
I think those are
the Monoprice Monolith.
Okay, I'll go with that. Outlaw Audio is should be pretty safe as well, since HSU makes their subs. So I could trust those if you're going to go just by what they say. If not, you have to look at the spec. Have somebody do the measurements. Wait until somebody does a review and does the CEA measurements, and then you can kind of get an idea. But you want ported.
Yep.
And it's going to be big, or it's going to be. So what did we say, Rob? It can be small, low, or cheap.
Pick
two. So if you want to go low and you want it to be cheap, it can't be small. So
and cheap is a very relative term here.
yes. If you want to hit 16 hertz, you're looking at a ported 4,000 series.
Ideally, and with one of its ports plugged. So in 3,700 cubic feet, if you're looking at SVS's lineup, if you went with a 4,000 series and plugged one port out of either the PB 4000 or the PC 4000, that would get you that rock solid 16 hertz output at. He says he never wants to go above 95 decibels, although. Way down there where you literally cannot hear, in order to actually experience it, you need some substantial output. So, you're looking at that. Power Sound Audio can certainly get you there.
I would be looking at one of their bigger subs. They have some of the ones that have two drivers, right?
They do.
Stacked.
They have two drivers stacked, or like dual opposing double drivers.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have anything smaller than a 15. They go up from 15. So they big, but that's how they keep the prices relatively reasonable.
He's got 3,700 cubic feet, man. It's got space.
Yeah,
for it.
HSU's VTF. What is that? The 15H Mark II. That one. Their big 15-incher with the triangle ports. Again, you'd actually want to block one of the two ports to get the maximum extension out of that model. That is actually your least expensive option that would get you where you want to go. So you could consider like a pair of the VTF 15H Mark IIs from HSU.
Chris knows we've covered it, and he honestly doesn't even really want to go over it again. But the topic of sealed subs versus ported subs, and potentially using one sealed and one ported together, keeps coming up. To make matters worse, during SVS's live hangouts, they've now repeatedly said that you shouldn't mix ported and sealed. They've also said that the common refrains about the type of content you listen to being a factor that can help you decide if you should go ported or sealed. They've even gone so far to say it would be best not to even mix different brands. Of course, they want you not to mix their subs with other subs. They sell subs. So Chris basically tried to ignore most of this. He's agreed with what we've said. If you have one sub that can provide sufficient output and extension, and a second sub with even more output headroom, then it doesn't really matter if one's sealed and one ported. They can both play sufficiently loud and low and loud, and it does. And and it especially doesn't matter if those low, loud sounds are coming from a movie or from music, sound to sound. But when you tried to put that answer out there, some people shut him down, saying that newer technology has changed the old answers. This is quite literally the new answer. Just wrong. So did something genuine? No, something did not genuinely change. Our modern subwoofer somehow made it in such a way that it's not as simple as both can play loud, low, and loud enough, so it's okay to use them together. Or is everybody, including SVS, wrong on the subject? SVS sells subwoofers, okay, and the people they are selling them to are people, and many of them believe a lot of this stuff. There is no harm in just parroting the party line of sealed subs should be put with sealed subs. It has a lot of face validity. It makes sense. People
and
think
it is
like, okay,
the
that makes
safer
sense.
answer to give.
It is the answer. Yes. The last thing you want to do is start alienating your customers.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, we just had a great example in the last question of the type of sealed sub you need to get to match a relatively inexpensive ported sub insofar as 20 hertz output is concerned. Right? So, I mean, that's where somebody is saying, I have a, an SB-3000, really popular sub, and rightly so. I've got an SB-3000. I'm thinking about adding a second one. What would happen if I paired it with a PB-4000? Can I do that? Can I mix sealed and ported like that? And the answer there, and we would tell you as well, is, well, if your SB-2000 is entirely sufficient for your current room, technically you could. It would be kind of a waste because you don't need any of the output capability of that PB-4000, but technically you could. But the safer answer when you're answering the general public is that's probably not a good idea because most people are not going to have the restraint to set their PB-4000 up so that it matches the output of an SB-2000. They're going to be like, I bought this PB-4000. I'm going to let this thing run. Oh, my SB-2000 can't keep up. I guess sealed is no good with ported. The safer answer is just don't do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we can talk about this over and over again, but the reality is just so... It's so obvious that this is a fine thing, the problem with mixing the different subwoofers, of course, is like we said, you can have small, you can have cheap, or you can have low pick too. Well, if you've got a good quality ported sub that costs you around $500-600, you're going to spend over $1,000 on a sealed sub that's going to do the same thing. That's just the reality of it. So if you come to me and you tell me no other information than I have an SB-2000, I'm thinking about getting the PC-4000, should I do that? My response is going to be, well, if your room is... one of two things. Either this is way too much sub for your room, or your first sub is not good enough for your room if you're thinking about this massive sub. Something doesn't match here. I love SVS, all right? They are a business, though, and that's what it comes down to. They're a business. Aperion started selling super tweeters, and if I get one more freaking email about Aperion's stupid super tweeters, I'm going to lose my mind, okay? Super tweeters don't do anything. They do not do anything. Don't tell me they do. They don't do anything. They could do something from like 14 kilohertz up to 20 kilohertz where maybe your speaker is rolling off. That's what they can do. After that, everything they do is for your dog. So there's a lot of stuff out there that people want to buy. And I don't begrudge a company for selling them the things that they want to buy. But at the same time, it is easier to just continue with the myths that are out there, and believe me, every time I go to one of these subwoofer, ported versus sealed, threads on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, it is a mess of people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, but they're talking real loud.
Yes,
they're talking real loud, and those are the people that are buying SVS.
And there's also the the factor of if you're trying to convey a marketing message, because this is a marketing thing. that is going
Right,
on. These
right.
Hangouts are marketing. Let's not be mistaken
They're
about
not
that.
informational.
And if you're
Yeah.
trying to convey a marketing message to a wide audience of people, you don't want something that takes half an hour to 45 minutes to explain. You want a one-sentence answer that people can go away from and feel good. And if they follow that one-sentence answer, they will actually get good results. And so if your one-sentence answer is the best thing you can do if you're going to buy more than one sub is to get two identical subs, I'm like, you know what? That is the safest, simplest answer. It really is.
That is the safest, simplest answer. And unless you're going to go through and, if somebody comes to me and says, I have an HSU sub, can I get an SVS sub? Yes.
Yeah.
I have a brand of sub I've never heard of, you've never heard of before. Can I get an SVS sub? Maybe.
Probably
I don't know.
not in a lot of cases. Yeah. And I mean, to defend the whole thing about asking about what type of content you listen to as well. I mean, yes, I am the one who's going to say sound is sound. I hate the whole thing of this sub is good for certain types of sound and not other. But where that comes into play is it's what type of person is this, basically? Because most music, the vast majority of music, has no content below about 35 hertz, maybe 32 if it's like literally playing the lowest note on a piano. I guess that's 27 hertz, right? But how often is that lowest note on a piano ever actually used? And how many people are listening to the pipe organ? So most music has no content below about 35 hertz. Most people are not listening to music at 105 decibels. That's not what most music listening people are after. So
that's not what most people are doing.
Exactly.
It's just
but a lot
loud.
of people who come and say, I want my movies to blow me out of my chair, are looking for 20 hertz or lower and 105 dB type of output levels. So there's some factor in there of what type of customer is this. Are they going to be happy with a sub that can give them everything they need down to 35 hertz, but then maybe won't give you true 20 hertz extension? But that's okay. For that customer, they're never going to be upset at that. And they're going to be happy with the lower price and the smaller size. Or is this someone where it's like, look, we know what they want. They want to be blown out of their chair with bass. We can't go recommending them SB-2000s, even though they might be sufficient. They're not going to rock this person's world and they want to be rocked. So that part makes sense to me.
And if you listen to Gary and all these other people, and when they come on this podcast and we start getting technical, they know they know what the real answer is. And there's a big difference between the interviews they have with us and these marketing meet group things that they're doing. I can't begrudge them doing it. Yes, would I rather they be sitting there arguing with their customers and telling them that they're wrong for believing that sealed subs are better for music and ported subs are better for music? Yes, I would prefer that. I don't think it would be good for their business model. But I think that it would be better for knowledge,
Sure.
But that's what we're for. You know better, and trying to educate that group of people that are there. That's just
yeah. And
they're gonna
and I
swat
don't
you,
begrudge giving simplified answers that will result in happy customers.
good results.
Yeah, that is okay by me.
Dre from Toronto. Last time Dre wrote us was over a year ago. At the time, construction on his theater was complete. He pretty much had all his gear, but he hadn't done all the finishing touches. Now he has, and he's happy with the results. Let's take a look. He's got 2 subs up front.
No, actually, interestingly, so I'm showing a before image first, which looks very nice in there, but afterwards, everything has been darkened down a little bit. He's got a darker carpet now, covered up a window, all that type of stuff. And that is actually like one of those squarish footstool things.
Just so visually.
Yeah, so visually, yeah,
That's
he
cool.
does actually have a second sub in his,
He changed his
rear
doors?
right. He
Did
changed
change
his doors. He most certainly did.
Wow.
And we'll mention that in the coming up
Look
below.
at this. This is
Some stuff has been
fancy.
changed.
I kind of
Yeah.
like
Oh
it.
yeah, it's nice in here. So yeah, the second sub is still in the rear right corner as we're seeing in the original before photo. And
Okay.
but he's got 2
Okay,
rows of
okay.
seats now. You didn't have 2 rows of seats before.
The whole room is painted in Benjamin Moore seal wool dark gray. He got 1-inch thick rugs from IKEA that made a big difference visually and acoustically, and also for comfort. The big spend was on replacing the doors with solid core doors. Pretty much all of his former rattles went away, and now he considers them a must-have for any theater. Money well spent. I am seriously thinking of getting a solid core door for in here, but my door, when we put this door on, the floor angles. And the guy who did it like had to cut off so much of the bottom of the door that because it's hollow, the bottom fell out. So
nice.
he had to like glue it back in and everything. So I'm a little terrified of that. Anyway, so he got his rear row of theater recliners, and instead of building a riser, he went for taller chairs that have an extra 7 inches of height already built in. He added IKEA smart blinds and lighting, and everything is now automated via a combo of Harmony, SmartThings, and IFTTT.
Yes, if this, then that.
Okay, I was trying to remember what that is. The automation is his crown jewel, and he thinks it's absolutely worth it. So it's beautiful pictures, just beautiful pictures.
Yeah.
So he'll be getting a few more acoustic panels. These are his questions. His plans were to put them on the front wall behind his LCR speakers, left, center, and right speakers, and also in the back corners. But straddling his corners isn't really an option with his space constraints, so it's okay to have flat panels on the walls in his corners, and while having his equipment rack in front of the panels in his rear left corner rendered the panels useless. Don't really see why he needs a whole lot more panels in here, but yes, I mean, no panel is useless. I mean, unless it's truly being covered by something. At least the bass will get back there to be somewhat tamped down by this thing.
It's mostly a question of how low down in the bass will these actually go, because the idea of straddling the corner isn't that that's just what you do. It's that it's geometrically efficient because you've created a larger air gap. You can fit thicker insulation if you're straddling the corner. And thicker insulation plus a larger air gap means lower frequencies that are being absorbed by that bass trap.
Right.
If you took the same thickness bass trap and just put it flat on the wall with essentially no air gap, well, it won't absorb frequencies as low as if it had the air gap behind it. And if you further have the panels flat on the wall and thinner, so they're only 4 inches thick or 2 inches thick or something, well, now they're really not absorbing much bass at all. So it's a matter of it's fine to have bass traps in your corners that are flat against the walls, but they just need to be thick enough to actually be absorbing the frequencies that you're trying to absorb. It looks like he's done a great job of already catching the reflection type of sounds. He's got panels on his side walls, panel on his back wall. So he's doing great there. So I would have to assume that his intention of putting absorption in the corners is to act as bass trapping. So it's just going to be a matter that they have to be thick enough to actually be absorbing bass and not just mid-range.
Right. I'm just looking at his room trying to figure out if there's other options here.
Well, I mean, he could start to go for horizontal corners, right? Which would probably be ceiling because he doesn't have a ton of room around the floor to be putting panels on the floor.
Yeah, I don't know how much space is behind those back recliners. That's kind of what I was thinking, was that back wall. I'm not sure how much room.
I don't know how much bass trapping he needs. Have you done the measurements to show that you actually need it?
Yeah. I'm looking at this room and not looking at it and thinking to myself, "Ooh, I know what I would do."
Right, like it doesn't look
I'm looking at it,
it
doesn't look like
treated.
It doesn't look undertreated. I mean, you're on your front wall a little bit would be nice behind your front speakers, would be fine. But I mean, I wouldn't cry a river if I couldn't do some bass trapping.
Panels on those solid core doors that match the panels on the other side, which I actually think he mentioned at some point. I mean, they're new doors, so maybe he just hasn't gotten around to it. He said he's getting some more panels. I mean, to me, honestly, if you've done the measurement and you're seeing that essentially in the crossover region between your speakers and your subs, that you could benefit from some more absorption there, that's where you've got some longer decay times, perhaps. If that's what the measurements show, I would actually consider something like GX soffit traps up around your ceiling. To me is the type of place where I would put those, because to get down to that 60 to 80 to 100 hertz range, you need pretty darn thick panels. Even 6-inch panels flat on the wall won't get you there. They'll get you maybe touching down to 80 hertz, but more in the sort of 100 hertz and up range. So something like GX soffit traps is something to maybe look at, but do the measurements. See if you actually even need it.
Yeah. There's just not a lot of surface area
left.
that you can trap. For budget reasons, he went with the Optima UHD 51A projector to start with. Now he wants some better black levels and higher contrast, but the JVC projectors are still out of his budget. Does that make the Epson 5050 UB his best option, or has something new come out to supplant it? I don't think anything new has come out to supplant it, but there's still 5040s available. I thought the 5040s were still a pretty good deal if you could get your hands on like
I mean, the big thing there is that they can't do 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR. Right. So if you want to do gaming, like if you're looking towards the new gaming systems, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, then a 5040 UB would not be a great choice there. I mean, the 5050 UB is, in my opinion, still the best option when you can't afford a JVC. Probably its closest competitor at a similar price point would be BenQ's HT 5550. That's a DLP one, so if what you care about most is resolution, that's using the 1080p panel that's wobbled 4 times per frame to actually give you 8 million pixels per frame, as opposed to the 5050 UB, which is wobbling a 1080p panel twice per frame. So it's giving you 4 million pixels per frame, not 8 million. So if that's what you care about most, that is possibly consideration. But the 5050 UB still has better black levels, still gets brighter, still has wider color, especially in HDR. The 5550 from BenQ is actually kind of limited in its color width in HDR mode. And then all of the lens adjustments that the Epson can do are vastly superior to what the BenQ can do, and all at a very similar price point. So nothing really has come out to supplant the Epson 5050 UB, in my opinion. Most of the new ones we've been seeing have been like ultra short throw or sub 1500, which is cool and all. But if you want max performance for the lowest amount of money, 5050 UB is still it.
Mike says, we've also often suggested to people that they put absorption panels on the front wall behind their LCR, left, center, right.
We just did.
We just did. Mike was planning to do so, but could we explain what that panel placement is actually doing? He can easily picture how sidewall panels and panels at the back wall behind your head are helping to reduce reflections, but what are the panels at the front wall behind the speakers doing to help the sound? Well, after it hits the back wall and reflects off, doesn't necessarily mean it's done. You know, it go all the way back to the front. We used to have 6.1 surround sound back in the day. Those were the good old days. Absolutely terrible ideas, and like why did we think that we needed more? Anyways, so what was happening was people would complain that their surround back speaker, which was a 6.1 system, so there's one surround back speaker, would sound like it was coming from the front of the room. And that was because they were getting a slap echo from that front wall, and it would bounce off that front wall, and it would sound like to them they were coming from the front of the room. So we would have to tell them to put absorption up there, or to aim it slightly differently so the reflection wouldn't come directly down at them. You know, get a more diffuse sound at the back there. But that can happen from any of your speakers in your room. And not only that, you know, a lot of front speakers have ports. And their bass does, just like the subwoofer, the bass does wrap around. So, you know, there's a lot of sound coming directly towards the front of your room, and catching that sound before it has a chance to reflect back is you know, just an overall good idea. It's just another place that we see. Now, it's not my first choice.
Right.
Yeah, it's always like third, well, fourth, but it's definitely the first reflection points, back wall, bass trapping in the corners, then front wall. It's kind of how I go. Though I kind of feel like the bass trapping in the corners should be first, but no one believes me.
Well, the front wall panels are kind of twofold. So it is basically like a secondary or perhaps even a third reflection. It's not a first reflection. Yeah. Right? It's not a straight billiard ball line that went from a speaker to your front wall and then went to your ear. So it's not a first reflection, but it can easily be a second or a third reflection. But the second part of it is that a lot of people are dealing with setups where their front speakers are relatively close to that front wall. The distance from the front wall to the back of the speaker is maybe a foot and a half. And if we're talking ideals in terms of not having any boundary gain, if you're talking about what would this speaker basically do all on its own before boundary gain comes into play, you'd have like upwards of 4.5, 5 feet between the back of the speaker and the front wall. Right. And I certainly don't have that. A lot of people don't have that. So if you can put a relative, I mean, we're not talking about a 2-inch panel. We're talking about a nice 4-inch panel, preferably with an air gap, so that you can get down definitely below 250 hertz. We want to get below 250 hertz with this. That's the idea anyway. So it's to take out some of that boundary reinforcement as well, so that you're not having boundary gain going on in the lower portion of what that speaker's playing.
And I mean, and I don't have any absorption on my front wall. I don't have any space for it. You know, I've got a screen there instead. So, I mean, it's nice. It'd be nice to have, but I don't. Rick has a 5.1 speaker setup. He didn't have a good location for putting his surround speakers directly to his sides, so he mounted them on his back wall instead, but his back wall is only 2.5 feet behind him. He used Odyssey on his Marantz processor to set speaker levels, but the Odyssey mic is supposed to measure evenly in all directions, correct?
Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be omnidirectional.
Our ears don't hear evenly in all directions, so would it make sense to increase the trim level of surround speakers, since Odyssey mic would hear just as well behind it as to the front or the sides, but his human ears do not?
Well, who was mixing the content?
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. I mean, so the person who is in the studio, right? They didn't turn to face each speaker as they were making their. They
Hope not.
sat
Anyway,
there.
maybe they did.
They shouldn't have. So they mixed it with the as they were hearing it coming out of each one of these speakers, or in the Atmos object, placing it, blah blah blah, and they did it their way, the way that made the most sense to them. So no, what you want is that the speakers so that at your seats or at that measurement point, they are all the same level. They all are the same volume when asked to play a specific volume. Therefore, when the movie or the music asks it to play a specific volume, it will play that volume from that speaker, and you will hear that volume, and then the mix will dictate what the volume was.
Yes.
And therein is the
of course, though, there is first of all, it's really common that a lot of people like to goose their surround speakers, especially when they're new to them, because people want to notice them. But there's a very valid reason why, which again comes back to reference volume, which is that the mix is being done at reference volume, but most people are not listening back to it at full reference volume. And because our human hearing is not linear in all directions, we do lose hearing some of the stuff that's coming from behind us earlier than we lose those same frequencies if they were coming from in front of us. So if you've got the master volume dial turned down somewhat, you really want to be sure to use something like Odyssey Dynamic EQ or Yamaha's YPOW Volume, or something else that applies curves of equal loudness, like Monoprice has their own version built into their HDP1 processor. But we want something that deals with curves of equal loudness, so that when we turn down the master volume, we aren't losing the ability to perceive sounds that are coming from other locations that, because the volume is lower, need to be relatively higher in the mix now. You can't just turn everything down uniformly and have the mix still sound correct. So there's a little bit more going on to it, Rick, than just that. It can explain why maybe you feel the need to goose your surround speakers sometimes, but you don't want to try futzing with it in the calibration part of it. The calibration is saying, here's what the signal said to play, that's what I'm going to play. Now, if I'm turning the master volume dial, I'm going to use something like curves of equal loudness to keep the mix sounding the way it's supposed to.
Right. So Rick has a single in-ceiling speaker in his kitchen. There's a single speaker wire already run inside the walls, and he'd like to hook it up to an older receiver. But he doesn't want only the left channel or only the right channel, so is there a way to combine the left and right binding post outputs into a mono channel without harming anything? Yeah, just play a center channel.
It is an old receiver.
Watch it be real quiet all the time, or just
he said specifically that in this old receiver it doesn't have a mono mode, so it unfortunately doesn't have a mode where it just takes the left and right and puts them both into the center and nothing else, because he would have done that if it were that simple. So
I've seen there's boxes to split things out like this and to put things back together,
but not typically at already amplified speaker level. And in fact, what I'm going to suggest to you, Galaxy Audio has a nice little box. It's like $35. It takes the left and right RCA inputs, so line level inputs, and turns them into a single combined mono output, although in the form of an XLR or a TRS, or actually it's just a TS connection. So you'd need you'd need a little converter cable. But I mean, the way you would do this is, I don't know if his old receiver has zone 2 output. If it does, what you would actually do is whatever source you want to play, you plug that in. You have that come out of zone 2 via the zone 2 pre-outs. Then you would actually feed the zone 2 pre-outs into this little Galaxy audio box so that it combines them into a mono signal. And then you would feed that back into a different input on the same AV receiver, either the left or the right. And in your main zone, you would play just the left or the right speaker, and that would come out of the left or the right binding post. But now it's been combined because you had it coming out of the zone 2 as a pre-out signal and being combined by this little Galaxy audio box.
I feel like that's not going to work.
It would work.
I don't know.
It would work.
I would like to have evidence that worked. I feel like, so the zone 2 you'd have to select a source in the zone 2.
Yeah, so zone 2 is set to the source you actually want to play. So that's...
And zone 1 is always set to whatever the PCM or whatever would know.
Yeah, so your main zone is set to wherever, so you're taking the pre-outs from zone 2, plugging them into the Galaxy audio box, combines that into a mono signal, and that mono signal is feeding a different input, and that input is always being played by the main zone.
So you would just plug that one into like the right
just
channel,
into the right channel, or just to the left
CD
channel.
CD or
exactly.
something like that, and then in your main zone you would play CD and then stereo or whatever, and then it's the right channel would be the only
one that's getting a signal, and the only one that's outputting anything from just that, say, right speaker binding post. Now, if you don't have...
I feel like you might create a hole in the space-time continuum if you do this for too long. You may want to get an old priest and a young priest to come over every once in a while and bless your receiver just in case. Just throw some holy water
The other
at it.
way is, if he only has one source... I don't know how many sources. If he only has one source, then just plug that source directly into this Galaxy audio box, and now it's combined that one source into a mono output, which you then plug into a single input, either the left or the right of that old receiver, and now that is the only thing playing that mono signal. So yeah, that would be the simplest if you only have one source.
Simplest. Air quotes.
Well, how much simpler can... Come on, it can't get much simpler than that. It's one extra box in the chain.
You're right. You're right. Feels like there should be like a $35 solution that involves amplification that you shouldn't have to worry about. But okay, Reginald's theater area. If he's not from England, I'm gonna be disappointed. I feel like everybody named Reginald is from England. But then I'm sure that can't be the case. Reginald's theater area is 15 by 18 living room, but it's open to a larger area. He has a pair of SVS PC-2000 subs to handle the bass, and his receiver is a Marantz SR6014. He's using only 5 speakers, which are the Martin Logan Motion Series, 60 XTI towers, 50 XT center, 35 XT bookshelf. Bingo! Surrounds, sorry. Being the Martin Logan Motion Series, they are not electrostatic speakers. They use a folded ribbon tweeter, and they are rated pretty high sensitivity, 92 to 94 dB, blah, blah, blah. But they are still at 4 ohm nominal. So will this Marantz receiver be able to power them all on its own, or should he be looking at amplifiers? 5 speakers, 15... He didn't say how far away he's sitting.
Didn't say how far away he's sitting, but it can't be more than 18 feet. We know that for just darn certain. It's probably considerably less. Let's hope.
I would guess that your Martin Logan would have very few problems with this, to be honest with you. I'm not a Martin Logan, your Marantz.
Yeah, this should be fine. I would certainly try it before purchasing an external amplifier. I wouldn't purchase an external amp right away. I mean, if you run this thing, go ahead, watch a movie, and then check. I mean, if it's getting really hot, which, you know, it could with a 4 ohm nominal speakers, all 5 of them. It's possible.
If you're sitting like 12 feet away or something like that, if you're right there at the edge of it, I could see that happening.
It's possible.
Video processing on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, let's see. So it's a 6014, so that has pre-outs for all the channels.
Right.
So, I mean, chances are, even if it got really toasty warm, if you were then to offload even just the front left and right, that would probably be well more than enough. Yeah, I would...
Right. His surrounds can't be that far away from him to begin
No,
with.
they can't.
And then the center channel would be the only one that would be really drawing any real power.
Yeah. I would certainly try this first. I'm not going to tell you that there's no chance that an external amplifier might be of some benefit here, because if you're getting really toasty hot, then you could lessen that electrical load on your receiver. It's within the realm of possibility, but it's not a for certain.
I mean, we can easily solve this problem just by you telling us how far away you sit, and then what relative volume you like to listen at. I mean, if you're like, I'm a full reference volume guy and I'm sitting on my back wall, like, okay, all right, well, you're
probably going to want an amp.
But,
well, we actually can.
Like, no, I listen to music.
We can give him that answer. If you're 12 feet and you pretty much never go to full reference volume, then I don't think you need an external amp. If your speakers are on the front wall and you're the 18-foot length and you're all the way on the back wall and you like to listen at full reference volume, I think you should probably get an amp.
If your numbers on your receiver ever say plus,
get
an amp. All right, Gurinder. Gurinder asks, what kind of coffee does Tom drink? Tom prefers a French press. That's what I use at home. It's a pain in the butt, and I'm getting real over it, to be honest with you. But I have experimented with a bunch of different types of coffee. Right now, I've been getting a French roast pretty regularly, mostly because it's a dark roast, and dark roast and French press tend to go pretty well together, in my opinion. I've done Sumatra and some other Ethiopian, single origin coffees before. I like them. They're great. Right now I'm buying French roast from Sam's because I can get for £2 for the price of 10 ounces at Fresh Market, which is where I normally buy my coffee. Kind of trying to save a little money there. If I've had my eye on an espresso machine.
Yes.
I'm very much interested.
Yeah, well, for his part, Gurinder was saying that his wife is the real coffee lover in their house, and she was the grind her own beans, do a full press, that type of thing. He says they got an espresso machine, and she is a convert now, so it was good enough for her, which is promising. If you're a coffee lover, it's promising.
So I'm sorry, Gurinder, don't listen to this part, and don't let your wife listen to this part. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gurinder, for what I'm about to say. My cousin is her and her husband both study cancer. They're microbiologists, and they do cancer studies and stuff like that, amongst other things. They do a lot of different type of research. The man loves coffee. He has a Keurig, but he had to get one. It's a very specific model that was very early, and they don't make it anymore. But the problem with the Keurigs is that there's always water in some part of them, and if you ever open it up and look after any length of time, you're going to see some interesting colors in some of those tubes, and it is 100% mold. And he insists that if his kids drop something on the ground, they eat it because bacteria they could. He's a microbiologist, whatever he is, I don't remember. And he's like, yeah, that's good, but that Keurig, I ain't touching it. I'm like, okay.
I mean, I guess if you frequently run the just hot water through cleaning cycle thing, like really frequently, that should avoid that. But everybody starts out that way for like maybe 2 weeks, and then you get lazy.
You get real lazy. That's right. So yes, where should he go to get printed printed panel fabric in Canada? We have talked about this, and I don't remember.
Acoustic Panels Canada is doing art panels now. They are doing printed panels. They didn't when they first started out. The first time I ever mentioned them, they weren't doing printed panels yet, but they are now. Including they can do custom ones, and so. The whole copyright thing, though, if you were looking for one that'll just print, poster art that you've downloaded, then that is probably going to be questionable. As long as you have the rights to print it, they will absolutely go ahead and print it. If it's your own photographs, if it's your own artwork, whatever it is, that they will absolutely print your own logo. If you're doing a business, totally they can do that. But yeah, there are of course copyright things to be concerned with. But that's that's our best choice in Canada because they do it at a reasonable price.
What software is good for making a floor plan? He's still relying on grid paper and a ruler. So
SketchUp. That's what a lot of people are using. SketchUp.
I feel like I've used that before.
It's from Google.
Hold on.
What are you gonna do? We're owned by the giant corporations, but it's pretty good. That's what most people use. Please don't ask me for details on how to use it. I'm no good at that type of stuff. When I edited together Lee's SVS subwoofer video, like that took me so darn long, and it is not complicated. I am not a good video editor, and I'm not a good 2D artist. I'm not good at CAD. That is not in my wheelhouse. So yeah, but people use it.
All right. I guess these are comments here. So he enjoyed Lee's SB-3000 Pro review, and he received his foam isolation pads for his center speaker. They are working nicely. Foam isolation pads.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these were not Oralex Mo pads because they're ridiculously overpriced. I think these were
Oralex.
Lix
What happened
Pro
to you?
in Canada.
We used to love you.
Yeah.
We used to be so close, and then
you got real expensive.
You got gold digging. What happened, Oralex? You get
When
gold
you're just
digging.
a
No one likes
piece
that.
of carpet over a piece of MDF on a couple of pieces of foam, and you start charging like $80 for that. It's hard to recommend.
You know they give that foam away when they send you stuff from Amazon, right?
Pretty much.
That foam just comes in the box. What happened to you, Oralex? What happened? Mitch would like to install a pair of speakers in his outdoor gazebo, but running wires out to them would be difficult, so we would ideally like for them to be wireless. Any suggestions? Maybe a pair of Sonos ones, or would those be a bad choice for outdoors? I am going to continue to say this until people tell me to stop. Portable Bluetooth speakers out that you can just walk outside with are almost always the best answer in this solution. I will suggest putting speakers out there. If you're going to do a wired, we always suggest the Yamahas. Wireless, I don't really have an answer for that. But just getting a decent all-weather Bluetooth speaker that you can walk around with and just throw up on a table. I mean, that's all anybody uses that I know. My brother-in-law had the same idea. He wanted speakers outside for his gazebo, blah, blah, blah. Nope. They just got themselves. I was like, dude, don't even bother. I mean, the cost for running the wires and everything else and, putting them up there, and then they're up there and then they're high and you can't really clean them without a big ladder, which you never will. So they just end up looking filthy. And no, just buy a portable speaker. I mean, there's a million of them out there. I like the... what's the one that you can throw it? In that one video I did where we threw that a bunch of times.
Was that
the Brave Brava something?
Oh, now I don't remember. I thought that might have been the UE Boom, but no,
it
wasn't that one. Well, while Tom tries to think of that, since you already mentioned Sonos, they actually have an outdoor speaker now. They didn't used to, but they do. It's called the Move. It is
Braven.
The Braven.
Braven was what it was called.
Is that still around?
There you go.
We can recommend it if it's still around, but if it's not still around. But back to Sonos. Yeah, Sonos has the Move. It is a $400 speaker, so it ain't cheap, but it is properly outdoor rated for dust and moisture, and it even has a rechargeable battery if you want to do completely wireless and not even have it plugged into power. It can run off of battery power as well. It is also Sonos's only Bluetooth compatible speaker. So it works with the normal Sonos connection, of course, via Wi-Fi, but then you can also just use it as a Bluetooth speaker as well. So as long as the price is reasonable to you, the Sonos Move would certainly fit the bill for what you're asking for. But yeah, a cheap Bluetooth speaker might just be the solve as well.
There's a Braven that's BRV X/2, whatever. Wireless Bluetooth speaker, USB, black, $85.
There you go.
I don't know how big this thing's. Let me see. If you want the, it's kind of small. There's a silver one or gray one that's $61. So there you go.
All right.
Don't say I never suggested anything. But literally just any rugged. I mean, because none of them are going to sound great. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. But that's not what you're going for. You're not there doing critical listening. You just want music while you're swimming or cooking or whatever. Just
typically
that's the solution. Yeah. Mitch would like to install a pair of speakers. Oh, wait, sorry, I said that. Full range speakers. Mitch occasionally takes part in a local home theater meetup. Most of the members are very nice, and when it comes to sharing knowledge, not everybody 100% agrees, of course, but most are at least agreeable. But one guy is insistent the right thing to do is to run your front, left, right speakers full range, and he has taken several classes and is a certified audio and video calibrator. There are two arguments in particular that Mitch isn't sure about, so he wants to ask us. Coherent bass wave. Oh, God.
Mm-hmm.
This guy says that if you put two sources of bass equal distance from the side walls, they will produce a single bass wave that travels front to back and reduces the axial width resonance modes. What?
Dude, I just copy and pasted. He wrote axial width resonate modes. That's it's not words that really make any sense. I'm sure he meant resonant, but whatever.
But even that doesn't make any sense. Axial
width is, I mean, that's the standing waves that are going side to side in your room. That's all that means. Resonant modes are just standing waves. That's all that means.
But two sources of bass equidistant from the side walls they were produced. Just the side walls, huh? Not the front
equidistant
and back?
From the side walls.
So he goes on to claim most people position their full range main speakers this way and create this coherent bass wave, but they often do not position subwoofers this way. And what do we say to that? That's not right.
That is completely not right. Okay, picture a pool of water. Drop two identical stones into that pool of water at exactly the same time, two identical stones, but, you know, they're the distance apart that you put your front, left, and right speakers. Does one wave come out of those two stones being dropped? Or do you get two waves that form a wave pattern?
Because if he's saying that putting them to equidistant from the side walls makes a coherent wave pattern, he's implying that the two waves are going to interact and then become
like
as
a single
one, which would
wave front.
Actually be terrible. That would actually be terrible. If you think about it, that would actually be the worst possible outcome because you've now got two sources that are creating peaks and dips in the exact same places. Now they have come together as one, which means the peaks are twice as big and the dips are twice as deep, which means there's, you know, you're going to be tamping down these huge resonances from these peaks, and there's no way to get the bass back from all the cancellations that you've got in this massive wave. I mean, in his theory, which is completely not correct, you can literally take a bucket of water and say, drop two stones and create one wave. That's you can do it. If you can do it, then I will believe your theory. So his second one is correct phase relationship in the left-right speakers. He's got a very convoluted explanation for this one, but it seems to boil down to this. First, he believes that if you're going to have proper stereo imaging, then you must begin with one speaker. He starts with the front left that's completely phase aligned throughout all frequencies, which happens naturally with a full-range speaker.
We could stop right there because that is just flatly not true. But whatever.
That sounds a lot like Thiel's whole marketing campaign about why their speakers are raked back. Is time aligned. All the drivers. I'm like, so you're telling me that all the frequencies coming out of the tweeter, which is they're all different wavelengths.
No.
They're all different. You know, they happen at different times, right? All of those, just by raking it back a couple inches, now suddenly time aligns with all the frequencies coming out of the mid-range, and then by raking that back a little bit from the woofer, now everything is in line.
Well, really? you probably need a speaker cable that has different thicknesses of threads going through it because each frequency will pick its own individual thread to go down. I've seen that marketing too.
Only if you've got the arrows going in the right direction.
Of course.
That's how they know. That's how they know where the electricity.
But anyway, yes, it's the old yarn of the signal said to only come out of one speaker, so you got to play all of them out of one speaker. But that's where he's starting.
So then the front right speaker, also full range, will naturally produce his previously coherent bass wave because low bass is in both mains.
Not always.
Not always, but he says to ideally keep the dedicated LFE channel completely separate from the bass management because there is a phase relationship issue between the speaker channels and the LFE channel that exists digitally. This what?
Dude, I'm quoting. I'm quoting. I've got to.
This can cause cancellation of bass when using bass management. I'm reading the words, and I'm
just
not
copied
getting
the
any of the
words.
meaning. This is a phase. There is a phase relationship issue between the speaker channels and the LFE channel that exists digitally. This can cause cancellation of bass when using bass management.
I mean, I think it's the whole you can't put more sound into one speaker because it'll mix up the original sound. It's not how waves work. I mean, I can get the intuition, because again, that whole thing of picturing, how does one driver that's moving back and forth manage to produce all of these frequencies? Like, how does that work? Well, it's the amazing thing of waves creating a complex wave, and the driver follows that complex movement back and forth, and you can add together multiple frequencies that get produced by one driver. It's difficult to wrap your head around, but it is what happens. And this whole, so I mean, yes, if you, let's say you had a bass note in a given speaker channel and you have bass managed it, so now that particular bass note gets played by the subwoofer instead of the speaker, and then the dedicated low frequency effects channel had that same bass note that for some reason is exactly in opposite polarity. Now that would be a horrible job of mixing, and when they were mixing it, it wouldn't sound right, so the soundtrack should never actually end up that way. But theoretically, this is possible to do, and that would result in a cancellation, and you wouldn't hear that note any longer from either the speaker channel or the low-frequency effects channel. But then they wouldn't have heard it while they were mixing it either, so they would never mix it that way. So, yeah, that's out the window.
But since this continues, but since pretty much all pre-pros and receivers will route the LFE and the bass managed bass to the subwoofer outputs together, the only solution is to configure stereo subwoofers so that at least the left side of the room and the right side of the room can be closer to having a correct phase relationship. Mitch doesn't really believe him, but he also doesn't feel sure enough to completely dismiss what he's saying or try to debate him about it. So what's our take? Well, it is a lot of fancy words for all the same things that has been said for like.
And
ever.
I don't even blame the guy, because this was taught by self-proclaimed experts as...
It is still taught by self-proclaimed experts right now.
And I can't blame somebody for sometimes paying for an education course. This is what is taught, and then going back and parroting that. I can't blame somebody for doing that, really.
So, phase issues... can be a real thing, okay, and we worry about it a lot in the upper frequencies quite a bit. But you can take a real world example like our listener Ray. Our listener Ray went through and phase corrected every sub. He's got five. He's got one in each corner plus a kind of a crossover sub that plays above those like four.
A mid-bass module is what we used to call it.
Yeah, back when they just still sold them. It would go between the speakers and the subs. So it was just this thing that would kind of sit behind the couch. I don't know, it was strange. I never really liked that thing. But so he's got four subs in his four corners, and he time aligned every single one of them so that at the microphone position, each sub hit their note at the exact same moment.
Individually, you could play one at a time, and their individual sounds would all reach the microphone at exactly the same time.
So then he went back and started playing some content, and it was awful. All of the work that Floyd Toole and Sean
Olive and Todd Welty,
I always want to call him Sean Harmon.
They work at Harmon.
That's why. So it says is that the subs, the subs and the room are basically one unit. Okay, one unit. So you cannot separate left side of the room from right side of the room when your bass wave is 60 feet long. Okay, unless you're in an auditorium, and even then, you cannot separate the room from the bass. You do not get a full wave out of the subwoofer before it has hit a wall multiple times and bounced around. Therefore, phase alignment, time alignment, all this left-right garbage, it makes sense for higher frequencies to an extent, but it does not make any sense for bass. Now, that being said, what's our take on whether or not you should bring this up to the just enjoy your whiskey, sir. Just let him talk, because you will never ever convince him. You can play him this tape, and he paid for an education probably that taught him this, and there is no amount of me or Rob or anybody else, no matter how smart or how bright they are, that is going to convince him that what he learned is not correct. And because at the time, as far as we knew, it was correct. It was the prevailing theory of how bass worked,
right?
Until the research that Floyd Toole and Sean Olive did, until that, we really thought that stereo subs made a lot of sense, and they put your subs at the front right next to your main speakers. I said it on this podcast for half a decade before we started
subwoofers as the stands for your bookshelf speakers.
Yes,
right? Yeah, it was super common.
Yes.
No, I mean the issue is that people will picture all the sound is coming out of a given speaker, right? And the speed of sound, it doesn't matter what frequency it is, the speed of sound is going to be the same. So they're picturing that it's like this one wave front coming out of the speaker regardless of the frequency, right? Which is factually true that the speed of sound is the same, but it's how many times did the molecules in the air vibrate back and forth before they managed to hit your ear. Now, in the case of very high treble, it's many, many, many times, sometimes thousands of times, the molecules of air have moved back and forth before that reaches your ear, and that way you hear it instantly. The straight line from the speaker to your ear is enough to vibrate the air multiple times, and your eardrum picks that up. But in the bass, the wavefront went past you, hit the wall behind you, and it's going in a sphere. It's not coming just in one direction. It's going in a sphere. So it's coming out. It went past you in multiple directions, bounced off of all 6 surfaces in your room, probably bounced off of 1, 2, maybe 3 times more before your brain ever even has the chance to register that something played. So different frequencies are perceived within a small room very, very differently. And that is the problem. It's this, how do we picture the difference between these different frequencies coming out of the speaker, because they're all traveling at the same speed, but they're not all vibrating at the same speed. That is the frequency by definition.
So if you look at like one of those waterfall plots, right? If you look at the waterfall plots in a room that's been treated, like a normal sort of room, you'll almost always see that the treble, as you go from treble down to bass, the waterfall plot is just, it comes closer and closer to you, right? So if I kind of think of it this way. If you were to look down over the top of a speaker, right, as it was playing, and you could see the kind of the size of the how much it affects in the room, as it was coming out. The tweeter has got like this smaller dispersion, maybe 30 degrees, to either side, or 15 degrees to either side. And as you get lower and lower, it just widens and widens and widens. And by the time you get to the bass, it's wrapped all the way around the speaker. It's a sphere all the way around the speaker. So it's that's, in my mind, is kind of how I envision it, but it's not exactly accurate. But it helps me sort of think about
why this is the case, why you don't have a full range speaker at every position, because there's the one side where we completely get the concept. It makes sense that, hey, the signal is saying all of these sounds are coming out of one speaker position. Doesn't it make sense to have one speaker playing all of those sounds? But we're in a room, and it isn't really the way that the sound works and bounces around the room, and it's not how we actually perceive it. And there is this whole section, basically from about 500 hertz down to about 80 hertz, that can be problematic, because ideally we would be treating everything up to about 250 hertz in this same uniform way, but we can start to localize sounds that are above about 125 hertz or so. because our brain relies on multiple methods of localizing sound. So there is this like tricky, basically an octave of 125 to 250, this really tricky octave. And that's like the octave where the full range guys will lay down almost all of their arguments, but it doesn't extend below that, and it has no bearing above that. And there is this tricky range, which is genuinely difficult to like actually get a handle on, and it is very room dependent. And that's basically where our passive bass traps do the most work, because we can't really do the multiple sources of bass method of evening that out, because then we won't get the localization, and we still run into problems if we only use a single speaker playing it, because it's still room dependent. So then you have to start treating the room itself to reduce the reflections in that particular range. So yeah, this stuff can get really complicated, but the idea that two separate speakers playing the same sound at the same time from two separate locations are only creating one wave, that is not the case. So that coherent bass wave thing is out the window.
I mean, if it was creating one wave, it would be mono.
Right.
I mean, do you hear music? That's what I would ask him. Do you hear music in mono? Because that's what one wave sounds like. It is mono. Because I hear stereo. When I listen to stereo, I hear a little bit out of this side, a little bit out of this side.
To be fair, he is talking about the bass, which does basically sound mono.
Oh, he's talking about his speakers making a coherent wave, and that's not just in the bass.
But, but
he believes it happens.
And then,
yes,
the whole phase aligning of everything is a... I guess I get where the idea comes from, but it isn't the way it works.
But again, whenever this information was introduced to this gentleman, almost certainly it was the prevailing theory, and I can't really blame anybody for believing it. And once you've committed that much of information and effort
the effort people have gone to in positioning their front, left, and right speakers to adhere to this dogma. Yeah. Ooh, once you put that effort in, that's that's the sunken cost fallacy, isn't it?
The sunk cost fallacy is really bad. And then, on top of that, the cost of a full range speaker. How many times, including Lee on this podcast, have I had to argue with somebody who has full range speakers and doesn't think they need subs because they got good bass? Yeah. Lee will tell you all about how good the bass was before and then after getting actually good subs well placed in his space. But hey, I'm just on that.
Well, speaking of Lee, we have a little surprise for everybody, which is that we have several questions left, but that is okay because Lee and I are going to go ahead and do a second podcast this week to catch up on some of our backlogs. So, you know what? I don't have to read the names because a bunch of these are going to be answered when Lee and I record, and it'll be all coming out in 1 week.
There you go. All right, so let's thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Andrew, Kevin, and Mark for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, as well as our 11
listeners.
Our 11 listeners.
Our 11 bread listeners.
What was Bilbo Baggins' birthday at the beginning of the Lord? His 111th?
111th.
111th.
That's right.
Patrons over at patreon.com. Including Brandon. So thank you, gentlemen.
Indeed. Andrew, Kevin, and Mark, thank you so much for the PayPal donations. Very much appreciated. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who might like to sign up for an ongoing automatic monthly subscription. Brandon W., thank you for being one of our 111 patrons.
Thank Brian for talking us up to Outlaw Audio and all the notes of gratitude from Brandon, Jason, Daniel, Kevin, Ryan. And a special thanks to Daniel for the Roku Premiere Plus. I am very much enjoying it.
Brian, thanks for talking us up to Outlaw Audio. Daniel, thank you for sending that Roku over to Tom. And Daniel, Brandon, Jason, Kevin, and Ryan, thank you for the notes of gratitude. And our thanks to everyone who continues to listen to AV Rant. We're happy to continue answering your home theater questions. We weren't sure how this was all going to go, if it was going to go way down, but it seems to have only gone up as though people have magically found some time to write to us. So, that is all
I
right.
really thought we were going to get so few questions that we were going to have to go back to doing news and just us talking. It's kind of, that would be kind of nice. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.